When my kids were small, I'd often lie awake at night at 3 a.m. marinating in fear. By day, my husband and I led our family in biking and composting and eating vegetarian and living in a very small house. We reduced, reused, recycled, and refused everything that we could to shrink our family's carbon footprint. But global temperatures kept rising. And even though scientists said we have to stop burning fossil fuels, the United States was in a frenzy of new coal, oil, and gas production. At night, I'd imagine my kids trapped on a future Earth that was a smoking wasteland like Mordor from Lord of the Rings. They were starving and miserable and ruled by orcs. I was miserable. I love my children more than anything. And like most parents, I would give a lung or take a bullet to keep them safe. But by 2007, I realized that our efforts were not making my kids any safer because they weren't shrinking industry's massive and growing carbon footprint. How could I protect my kids, all kids, from hellish scenarios? I wasn't rich or famous or even a scientist. I was a harp teacher. I didn't know CEOs or senators or celebrities. So what power did I have to rewrite this story? As I mulled this question, one day I noticed my neighbors making their annual Halloween front yard display. I decided to add my own, the graveyard we need. I made headstones for the things we need dead: climate denial, racism, mountaintop removal. I piled some rocks around their bases and hung up some ghosts that my kids had made. And as I lit it all on Halloween evening, I felt excited, but also a little scared. What if my kids feel really embarrassed and resent me? What if the neighbors stop loaning us cups of sugar? What if someone takes one of those rocks and heaves it through our front window? Instead, though, neighbors and trick-or-treaters said, "Hey, cool graveyard." And I felt better speaking out instead of just freaking out. So over the next few years, I made 14 more installations that became more and more interactive. Each was a form of storytelling, of restoring the future, which to me means to restore the world and tell a new story about what's possible in it. Today, I propose that any of us can harness our creativity and sense of humor to restory our future on the Earth. Right now, most of us are telling the wrong stories about the future and at the worst time imaginable. Scientists say we have only until 2030 at the latest to slash carbon emissions nearly in half or face irreversible climate tipping points. 2030, that's just a few years from now. But they also say we have all the technology and resources to do it in time. We need to change all of the systems that feed and shelter and transport us. But COVID-19 proved that we can quickly restructure our society in response to a threat. Before coronavirus, nobody dreamed that within weeks we would be attending weddings on Zoom or have a mask for every day of the week or give TED Talks to stuffed animals. But here we are. So if we know how to avoid climate apocalypse and we've practiced restructuring ourselves, we will all leap up tomorrow morning and follow the roadmaps that scientists have given us, right? And why wouldn't we? We'll have cleaner air, better health, more livable cities, lower grocery bills, a stronger overall economy, and much happier and more relaxed children. Cutting pollution to save ourselves is a complete no-brainer. We need leaders who tell that story of a thriving future and who invest in bullet trains, wind and solar farms, smart grids, and healthy forests and soils to capture carbon pollution. We need leaders who embrace this mission and say, "We've got this, let's go." But the US is the #1 producer of oil and gas on the planet. Climate-wise, we live in the belly of the beast. Most of our leaders tell the wrong story about the climate crisis. Some deny that it even exists. Some blame developing nations or propose Band-Aid solutions. Few offer concrete plans for the epic changes scientists say that we must and can make before 2030. Even though most Americans want climate action, even though we've already practiced restructuring under COVID, and even though those leaders' stories are destroying our children's shot at a livable future. So what does this mean for you and me? What does it mean for young people who know that without heroic action right now, their futures look bleak? It means that we live with dissonance. We want a vibrant future, and we know we're headed to disaster. Our brains don't like dissonance, so to manage it, they tell us stories. I've heard many of the stories people's brains are telling them about the climate crisis. Most are wrong and dangerous because they can stop us from acting rationally for our own survival. Here are the 4 stories I've heard the most. First is the rescue story. Someone else will save us. Corporations or God or Elon Musk will rocket us all to Mars where there's nothing to eat or breathe. Then there's the be here now story. We can't control the future. The present is all we have, so be here now. Now this is important on the yoga mat, but it's actually deadly when our very survival depends on a bold action plan. Next is the eco-superhero story. We all need to just try harder to bike and compost and go plastic-free and hang our laundry and take shallow baths and badger everybody else to do the same. I know because I lived this story for 15 years. But the last story is the most dangerous, and it's the one that kept me up at night years ago. We are doomed. Movies, books, and games hammer this story into us, and especially into kids. When paired with news of real-world climate breakdown year after year, it can feel as if humanity really is doomed. And if we're doomed, why bother to resist? But resistance is what ended my 3 a.m. doom sessions. I kept doing my front lawn installations, and then I started writing articles saying to the world that I'd do everything I could to stop polluters and the politicians they control from killing my kids' planet. I met others who were also worried about the climate crisis, and together we co-founded a grassroots climate justice organization, using the arts to restore the future. When we learned that a Canadian corporation was using the power of eminent domain to seize private properties in Oregon for a fracked gas export pipeline, we condemned the homes on my block and ran a fake life-size pipeline across their lawns, then called a press conference. Our display told people how to stop the pipeline by pressuring the governor. We offered postcards, a place to write them, and a selfie station with whiteboards and hashtags so that anybody walking by could right then and there send a personal message to the governor. The impact of this project stunned me. That pipeline united our neighborhood. All the kids on the block loved helping us build something so big and dramatic, especially when it was featured on the front page and on TV and on statewide radio for 5 days. Then climate leader Bill McKibben tweeted out our photo, and hundreds of thousands of people learned about this little-known threat. Almost overnight, a statewide coalition formed to fight the pipeline. And that's when I really understood the power of the arts in the climate conversation. That pipeline surprised and delighted people. It wasn't dull science charts, and it wasn't drowning polar bears. It was fun, and it told an empowering story. This pipeline is not inevitable. You and I have the power to stop it and to shape the global energy future. Here's how we're going to do it. A few months later, world leaders were gathering in Paris for World Climate Talks, and we invited the public to tell them the story of the future we need, off dirty energy and on clean energy, and to do it in a fun way. As we filmed from above, hundreds of people used their bodies to form a giant oil drip and transform into a bright sun, the symbol of solar power. After we filmed, parts of our video were actually shown to world leaders in Paris. And people told me how happy they were to be part of such a creative and unifying project. One teen who had given a speech that day and co-led our march and appeared on the evening news told his mom, "This was the best day of my life." So that day again, I learned that people of all ages tend to feel happier and more connected when engaged in meaningful climate action. With all of life on Earth hanging in the balance right now, this is critically important. Anyone can be part of this, and it's not that hard. We first imagine the future that we want for ourselves and for everyone and everything that we love, and then we tell that story everywhere we can with authenticity and with humor and with fierce determination. So now, let me invite you to be part of restoring our future. How do you start? First, think about what you're doing when you feel the most inspired. For me, that's being out in nature. Do more of what inspires you. It'll help you imagine the future you want and how you might story that for other people. And scientists found that if you create while inspired yourself, your work is more likely to inspire other people. Next, connect with other people. Collaborating with even just one other person improves projects and usually makes them much more fun. And I found that people appreciate invitations to create. Making art reduces anxiety and improves our sense of well-being. And you never know where a collaboration might take you. In January 2017, two friends were knitting together and talked about the Women's March later that month. One needed a warm hat for the march, and the other couldn't march because of an injury but wanted still to participate. Their solution, the pussy hat, allowed anyone to be part of the Women's March by knitting. And this pink hat became a global, playful show of solidarity for women's rights. It restoried the future, imagining one in which women are safe and respected everywhere. Third is to empower other people. Our pipeline showed a neighborhood condemned and overrun by a huge pipeline, and that's pretty negative imagery, right? But the key was the restoring part. We told people how to prevent this scenario by demanding that our governor lead us into the clean energy future. So give your audience one easy thing that they can do. Last is to just start. I am not suggesting that you take over your neighborhood with a pipeline. My first project was only requiring cardboard and Sharpies and a couple of ghosts. Find your small stage. They're everywhere. Every interface between your public world and your private world is a potential space for restoring our future. For example, you might want to paint a banner for your bike or your balcony. Maybe you'd like to paint rocks to leave around town, or commandeer an empty flagpole for your message. Or maybe you do an annual holiday letter, and this year you can share one thing you'd like to do in the coming year to restory the future and give people ways that they can help you. Maybe you'd like to sketch it out in comic book style. Or maybe you like making people laugh. You can make a funny video. Studies have shown that comedy about the climate crisis actually makes people feel more hopeful and more likely to take positive action. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms allow the potential for anyone to reach millions of viewers. But how many of those actually make us laugh and inspire us to fight for systemic changes? Yours could. And as the movements for justice grow, we are now seeing a renaissance of public art. Handmade signs in countless windows tell the story that society can and should be restructured around the idea that Black lives matter. Chalk drawings tell it from sidewalks, murals tell it from the sides of buildings, banners shout it from highway overpasses. And much of the mainstream establishment is finally beginning to embrace this idea. This is also happening with the climate. People all over the world, especially young people, are restoring our future, using art, using filmmaking and public theater, projections onto buildings, new anthems and games, giant puppets, and even climate cheerleading squads at football games. Millions of people worldwide are telling the same story. We can heal our world in time because stories work. Art moves us. Making art and telling stories nourishes our spirits, and we all need sustenance for the change-making work ahead of us. So, to review how to restore our future, starting right now. First, get inspired so you can imagine the future that you want and how you might tell that story. Then connect with others, empower each other, and just start. Imagine if we all use our small but significant spheres of influence to restore our future on Earth. Imagine if your story helps even one person feel less alone and more inspired to fight for the systemic changes scientists say we can still make. We need your story of a thriving future. We need your ideas about how to get there. What new story will you tell first?